And then Genshin Impact decides to drop the worst character in human history with the
Cloud Retainer mains. I want to tell you right now that your character is still going to be great. In the past week, I witnessed one of the most weird and nonsensical waves of Doomposting I've ever seen. Look, I get it, she received that change that not many people liked, and whenever Genshin players see the word nerf, they just start Doomposting the upcoming character. Today I will try to answer some of the most popular questions and doubts that have arisen in the past week, and I will try to change your mind on the Cloud Retainer because I genuinely think she's a very good character in her niche. So first of all, the changes she received in beta. In my opinion, they've mostly been positive, but there has been one change in particular that instantly triggered the spare mode for the Cloud Retainer mains, and that was that they removed her grouping. They removed the passive that allowed her elemental skill to group opponents. Of course, it kinda sucks for an anemo character to lack grouping altogether, but I just want to tell you that compared to the first version of the Cloud Retainer we had, this isn't actually much worse. And the reason is that her grouping only really worked well against light opponents such as Hillagers, so it wasn't really going to be that impactful in practice in a base 12, especially if you consider the fact that the plunge attacks the group opponents. If you played Xiao before Feruzan came out, you know what I'm talking about, like the plunges just throw opponents away. So even if she had a strong instance of grouping, the fact she could only do it once a rotation just lowered the impact it could actually have. On the flip side, a valid reason to be pissed for this update is if you wanted to replace Jhin with Xianyun on all the non-plunge teams, in which case the grouping Xianyun had would have been better than whatever Jhin has, so if this is your take, then it's justified kind of. But still, again, it was never going to be that good of a grouping effect, let's be honest. As a trade-off, we got 3 positive changes. The one I liked the most is that they changed how her particle generation works. Previously, if you wanted to generate 5 particles with her elemental skill, you need to do the full version of it, so the triple jump and then plunge thing. This honestly seemed pretty annoying because her triple jump and then plunge was very slow animation-wise. It was going to take 2 or 3 seconds, which is a lot for an elemental skill cast. With the latest changes, even if you just jump once and then plunge, you still will generate 5 particles, which is great because it's really much quicker in terms of rotation time. Additionally, they replaced the old grouping passive with a new supportive passive that gives extra crit rate to characters whenever they use plunge attacks. This one is actually pretty confusing, however, because it gives you more crit rate the more opponents you hit with the plunge, which by itself wouldn't even be that weird, but it's pretty confusing if you look at the other passive the Cloud Retainer has, specifically the one that gives a flat damage bonus to your active character's plunge attacks, which by the way also got buffed. The reason it's weird is that this other passive only works on a single opponent. So if, for example, with a plunge attack you hit a lot of opponents, say 4, only one of them will receive the increased damage. So it's pretty weird for one passive to only work on one opponent, while the other passive specifically works better if you deal damage in AoE, but just MiHoYo doing Hoyo things, I guess. Also, I think that her giving crit rate is pretty weird because she's meant to work with Furina since she is a healer, and Furina enables the Mana Shoe set for all characters that already gives a lot of crit rate, so having even more bonus crit rate as a baseline is not really going to be that needed. Overall, I will definitely say the changes were a positive because the grouping nerf didn't really affect her standing in the meta in my opinion, and the good changes she got were actually pretty useful additions. So now, regarding her potential in the meta if she comes out with her kit unchanged, I have a few things to say. Just going to address the elephant in the room real quick. If you want to pull for Xianyun to find a Jhin upgrade, just don't bother. I know it might sound a bit harsh, but it is true in my opinion. Her kit, now more than ever, is specifically geared towards working with the niche she enables, so plunge teams. Using Xianyun in teams that are not meant to do plunge attacks basically takes away all the offensive support her kit provides. It's true that by being a Catalyst user, she has access to free-to-play options like Hakushin Ring and the Thrilling Tales that, despite being very accessible weapons, provide pretty nice support for a lot of characters, but by itself this isn't really pull-worthy. But I'm here to tell you that this is fine for her and she shouldn't get doom posted because of it. I hear all the time that she should have just been a general support with healing, so basically a Kazuha with healing, but this was never going to be realistic. And the reason is that outside of Bennett, who is pretty much an outlier at this point if you haven't noticed, healers don't typically have any kind of meaningful offensive support. Look at Baiju for example, so the most recent 5-star healer we got. He sure has a lot of healing, but outside of that, his kit doesn't offer much. Sure, he provides reaction bonuses with his passive, but the actual offensive impact this passive has is pretty small, and his Dendro application is not that great in general, so offensively is just really average. On the other hand, with Xianyun, they're doing something that makes much more sense, and that is they're restricting her to a very specific niche, but for that context, she's providing real meaningful offensive support, and that doesn't happen a lot with healers. It doesn't happen at all actually. For this reason, in my opinion, if she were to be a general support, she only would have been a very slight upgrade over Jean, realistically. Instead, we got a character that covers a specific niche very well, and this niche is real good, let me tell you. Like, if you're somebody that is angry because you wanted to pull for Xianyun, but you don't like the idea of using punch teams, then I get it, like it's your preference. But if you're angry because you think it's a bad niche, then I think you're just wrong. To give this more context, I already thought that the teams she enabled were pretty nice in the first week of beta. Back then, I made 2 assumptions that really limited her potential in the teams I've calculated her on. The first is that I only assumed she would allow characters to use low plunges, and I didn't think this was necessarily going to be the case, but the jump from low plunges to high plunges in terms of total damage is so high that I just felt like making this very conservative assumption here. And it seems that characters that are affected from her elemental burst can indeed do these high plunges, which was a massive increase in my calculations for the damage of the carry. The thing I hear a lot from the people that want to doom post Xianyun is that she seemingly only helps Xiao, Diluc and Gaming with her support, but this isn't true. And the reason is that her team core is so good and the plunge niche is so strong that even if you pick a random 4-star carry like Chongyun and put him with Xianyun, Furina and Shenhei or Bennett, his damage is going to be very high. Basically, based on my estimations, any team that has Furina and Xianyun in it is going to enable the team to reach at least a DPS of around 55,000 or 60,000, regardless of who is the carry, and that is an extremely high floor. Of course, this gets much better if you can implement amplifying reactions on the team without disrupting the core of the team. So for example, the Diluc teams, the Gaming teams, because plunges are very strong attacks dealt in a single instance, and amplifying them with the reactions like Melt or Vaporize is just huge. This leads us to the second assumption I made that luckily wasn't right. I just assumed that the Xianyun would never be able to sword Pyro on the Vaporize teams with Diluc, Gaming, but this isn't always the case. Basically, the issue was that with Furina on team, since her Hydro application from the elemental skill is constant, you will never find a window to sword Pyro with Xianyun. But based on the footage I've seen, if you have Bennett's Constellation 6 and you use his burst, his elemental skill and then a normal attack that will be Pyro infused, you will apply Pyro to a single opponent, which then you can sword with the Xianyun with a normal attack right after. This only works with Bennett's Constellation 6 and also should only work against single opponents, but in these scenarios, the damage gets so high that it's almost hard to believe. Like, even with free-to-play weapons, the damage a Diluc can do in these scenarios is nothing short of absurd, considering it was nowhere near this level before Xianyun came into play. And of course, for characters that like to use plunges to begin with, like Xiao, she's just a massive numerical upgrade. Actually, I've heard people being skeptical over this, because her buffing only applies to a single target, and Xiao being the AoE juggernaut that he is, he will face a lot of opponents in a lot of situations. So in these scenarios, a character like Bennett that can buff his damage towards all opponents can seemingly be better, but realistically I think that using a character that doesn't restrict you to play within a small range like Bennett does is just an advantage for a character like Xiao that is very mobile in these scenarios where you're facing multiple opponents. So while I think the point makes sense, I believe that in realistic scenarios she will just feel better. So overall I think she's definitely insane for characters like Xiao, Diluc, Gaming, but at the same time, I think that the reason some people believe she's only good for these characters is that she's not out yet. On paper, she just enables a lot of different possibilities that at the very least seem pretty great. And I think it's just harder for people to grasp this potential of hers compared to previous characters because it's an entirely new niche. And while I get it, the niche is not for everybody. If you're interested in it, please don't underestimate her. And with this, I'm done for today. Peace!